I've always wanted to be in a band. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to write songs and perform them in front of people. Unfortunately though, I couldn't play an instrument and I was too self-conscious to share any of the lyrics that I wrote with anyone. So, I lived vicariously through the bands I loved. Obsessively watching music videos, reading articles about them, consuming memes, and watching interviews. Now, most of these interviews were all the same.
How'd you get your band name?
Why do you make music?
What's your prison bitch name? It gets boring to see interviewers ask the same basic questions. It gets boring to see the interviewers ask the same boring questions, no matter how captivating the artist is. But there is one interviewer who never fails to entertain. One interviewer who always remembers what you forgot. One interviewer who stands, towers above the rest. The greatest interviewer of all time. And his name is...
Nardwuar! Nardwuar! Nardwuar!
Hello, and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I'm Trevor, and I am eternally uncool. I make videos about music, music culture, and anything that interests me. But mostly music right now. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, then I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and watching the rest of this video. If you're an obsessive music nerd like I am, then you know the name Nardwuar. If you're not an obsessive music nerd like I am, then you're probably asking yourself,
What is a Nardwuar?
The short answer is Nardwuar is a interviewer who uses his quirky persona to interview musicians, actors, and the like. Being interviewed by Nardwuar is like a rite of passage for entertainers. Once you receive a piece of obscure information about yourself from this strange little man, you know you've made it. He is a beloved figure in the music world. But I feel like a lot of us fail to realize that Nardwuar is more than just this mythical entity bearing gifts for rappers. Nardwuar is the greatest interviewer of all time. But what do we know about his life? Or his music? Yes, he makes music. Or his fuckery with Canadian politicians? The answer is nothing. We know nothing. We're all just Jon Snow. I've never seen Game of Thrones. Does that make sense? Fortunately for you though, I have a camera, I have internet access, and I don't have anything better to do right now. So grab a drink, grab a snack, grab an obscure vinyl record, and let's get into the video.
Any idea what you're going to do once you get out of university, you know, when you grow up?
Well, my parents have an idea. My dad would like me to be an engineer.
And what do you think about that?
I'm gonna try to be an engineer, but I don't think I'll be an engineer.
John Ruskin was born in 1968 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Who would have thought that this seemingly magical creature with a positive attitude and penchant for giving gifts was Canadian?
You can cross fuck off.
He was born to Vernon and Olga Ruskin, an engineer and a journalist slash teacher slash historian, respectively. His mother would expose the young John to a lot of Vancouver history, bringing him to what's known as society meetings. Knowing that Nardwuar's mother was a journalist and historian just makes so much sense when you realize the amount of research that has to go into every single one of his interviews. John was a very precocious kid, winning a public speaking contest when he was still in elementary school. I know nothing about that though. I could not speak publicly in school at all. Could barely do it now. He was also a member of the student council at Hillside Secondary School in Vancouver. And while he was a member of the student council, he would conduct his first interview.
At secondary school's first dance of 1985. We're in the process. I don't know if you can hear boys in the background or not, but that's them.
In 1986, Ruskin attended UBC, the University of British Columbia, where he would major in history. He also volunteered at the college's radio station.
You guys know you're on the air, you know that?
1986 was also the year that he would start using the name Nardwuar, the human Serviette. When asked about this name, Ruskin responded with, "It's just a silly name, like Sinbad or Sting." The human part surprisingly didn't come from the fact that he himself was human, maybe. Instead, it came from the song Human by The Cramps. And the serviette part came from napkins. That's what they call napkins in Canada, serviettes. So Nardwuar, the human napkin. We wipe our hands on him? Nardwuar would get his own show on the radio station in 1987. It was a mix of eclectic music being played, commentary, and most importantly, interviews.
Tonight, videographer Jay Myers wraps up his profile of the soon-to-be famous Nardwuar, the human serviette.
Nardwuar set himself apart from other interviewers in very specific ways. For one, just fucking look at him. He looks like he came from the Lost and Found box at a ska show. A lot of interviewers look very samey. Your basic business casual, maybe a band t-shirt if they're hip, but for the most part, there's no flair.
We need to talk about your flair.
Nardwuar is nothing but flair. He is a literal cartoon character, guys. Another way Nardwuar set himself apart from other interviewers is the research he put into these interviews. I don't know if Nardwuar does the research himself or if he has a team that does it for him, but either way, it's impressive. Nardwuar will pull out the most obscure piece of information that not even the artists themselves remember. Seriously, most artists have to take a minute or two to even compute what he just said.
You had a dream about coming to Canada with the Kardashians?
Yeah. Yes, I had that dream. Yeah.
I can get into your dreams now.
Nardwuar also has what a lot of interviewers lack. A personality. I guess more accurately, a persona. Most interviewers are very formal and straight-laced, straightforward. They rarely try to make their interviewees uncomfortable. In fact, they never do it. Nardwuar, on the other hand, is a character, a persona. The official Nardwuar website describes him as a socially toxic superfan. The kind of person entertainers have learned to handle with kid gloves and a 10-foot pole. He has no sense of personal space, no off switch, and an exaggerated Canadian accent. With a persona like this, you get a lot of different reactions from a lot of different people. Some artists match Nardwuar's energy, like Tyler the Creator. But other artists are less friendly, mistaking this over-the-top persona as genuine or being turned off by the awkwardness. One specific example is a 1998 Henry Rollins interview where Henry is just not into it at all.
Pick the next two questions you're gonna do, come up with them, so pick your two best shots, because we're not gonna sit here and jack off all day.
He was interviewed a few years later and he was slightly less grumpy.
Do you remember the last time we talked about 13 years ago?
Uh-huh.
What do you remember about that at all?
Your breath stank.
How is it today?
It's much better, thank you. Thank you for flossing.
I use mints.
Excellent.
Some artists have gotten downright mean with Nardwuar, like Dave Rowntree of Blur assaulting him.
Some people say I'm wearing a Blur or Shite shirt, but am I wearing a Blur or Shite shirt, Dave of Blur? Dave,
Rowntree did apologize in 2011, and Nardwuar did accept the apology because he's cool. Everyone from Nas to Travis Barker have had less than stellar interactions with the human Serviette.
When you joined the Transplants, were you aware of how down with hip-hop Rob was?
That's stupid.
What do you mean?
I'm saying that's a stupid question.
But despite his interviewees' attitude towards him, Nardwuar always manages to keep a positive attitude. This upbeat attitude, mixed with his persona, disarms a lot of the artists he interviews. It allows them to let their guard down. They don't have to use their usual stock responses. The only thing I can really compare Nardwuar's interviews to is Between Two Ferns, or The Eric Andre Show, albeit less antagonistic than either of those things. The artists being interviewed are either so disarmed or pacified that it's hard for them not to play along, or they get so turned off and angry that their venom is entertaining. It's all just so absurd, but I think that's what makes it so fun. But Nardwuar isn't just a rambunctious and goofy interviewer of musicians. He also harasses politicians, which I think we can all get behind.
Mr. Kretchen, regarding Suharto, there's a song out there right now by a punk band called the Nomads, called the Suharto Stomp. Earlier today as well at UBC, there were an incredible number of protesters. Do you think, Mr. Kretchen, if you were, say, 40 years younger, that you too would be writing punk songs and protesting against AIPAC?
I purposefully keep my politics ambiguous on this channel, and that's not going to change today. I will, however, bring up Nardwuar's interactions with politicians in both Canada and the USA. John Ruskin is a journalist, specifically a guerrilla journalist. Guerrilla journalism, or citizen journalism, is a form of journalism that presents a radical challenge of professionalized and institutionalized practices of mainstream media. Nardwuar would sneak into conferences and ask politicians these outlandish questions. His targets in the US have included former President Gerald Ford and former Vice President Dan Quayle. Anyone who watched this channel old enough to remember those two people? I don't.
Yeah, Mr. Ford, I was wondering, why does the United States of America, possibly the greatest nation in the entire world, why would they take an interest in Canada?
You can cross fuck off.
In Nardwuar's home country of Canada, he asked the former Prime Minister, I'm going to read it off of my laptop because I know I'm going to pronounce it wrong, John Cruton, we're going to call him. He asked former Prime Minister John Cruton the hard-hitting questions.
Do you think, Mr. Kretchen, if you were, say, 40 years younger, that you too would be writing punk songs?
He also interviewed Prime Minister Paul Martin and challenged him to a game of hip flip. Hip flip. What's hip flip? He would do this to a lot of Canadian politicians.
This is kind of fun. This is, whoa! Stephen Harper, please, will you do the hip flip? You guys don't have to carry me.
Nardwuar's political interviews are kind of punk rock. He doesn't put on this formal facade to interview these figures. He asks the weirdest questions and completely blindsides these guys. It just really shows that politicians, whether they're from the US or Canada or wherever, they're not deities, just normal people with this really shitty job. And they can easily be disrupted by this guy in a weird hat with a microphone and a hip flip.
There's some pretty swanky real estate in West Vancouver. It's home to some pretty good earners like Brian Adams and Mike Reno of Loverboy, and Gen X author and spokesperson Douglas Copeland, to name but a few. What you probably didn't know was that it's also home to the infamous rock and rollers, the Evaporators, led by the one and only Nardwuar.
Not only is Nardwuar the human serviette, a gift-bearing interviewer, but he's also a pretty accomplished musician. The Evaporators were formed in 1986 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada by Nardwuar, who sings and plays keyboard. The music is a mixture of punk rock, ska, and garage rock. They've released 7 full-length albums, 1 compilation, and a handful of singles. I actually happen to have one of their albums right here, Ripple Rock. Funny enough, I found this after I had this entire video written in a secondhand store in Havre de Grace, Maryland. Fate. They've collaborated with everyone from Andrew WK to the New Pornographers. Can I say pornographers on YouTube? I highly recommend this band if you're a fan of punk rock and ska, something that's similar to like Devo, maybe? Or if you just want to see Nardwuar sing and perform. Unsurprisingly, he's a very charismatic frontman. In 1999, Nardwuar planned to ambush Courtney Love, famed Hole singer and the widow of Kurt Cobain. However, that event was quickly canceled when Nardwuar suffered a seizure and a temporary paralysis from a cerebral hemorrhage. Now, did Courtney Love do it? You decide. She didn't. Legally, I have to say, she didn't do it. Fortunately, though, he made a quick recovery and he was back to his usual antics in no time. More recently, in 2015, Nardwuar suffered a stroke. The stroke resulted in him having to go to a hospital to have a foramen ovale repaired. Whatever that is, I'm no geologist. This news rocked the music world. Nardwuar is a beloved interviewer. No matter what genre of music you're into, no matter what scene you belong to, everyone loves Nardwuar.
That's stupid.
He posted a picture of himself in recovery wearing an Anvo t-shirt, which is just so on brand for him. I bring up Nardwuar's health because it shows how beloved he is in the music world and his legacy therein.
Keep on rocking in the free world and doot doodaloo doo doot doodaloo doo doot doodaloo doo doot doodaloo doo.
Nardwuar is probably the greatest interviewer of all time. It's not Larry King, it's not Oprah. Sure as hell ain't Brian Stars. It's John Ruskin. He's managed to carve out a niche for himself that sets him apart from other interviewers and gets different responses from the artists he interviews. Each interview is entertaining, whether the artist plays along or not. And it's all because of this persona that this journalist created for himself. Nardwuar's YouTube channel sits at over 3 million subscribers, with hundreds of videos interviewing everyone from Ice Cube to My Chemical Romance. And these videos get everywhere between a couple thousand and a couple million views. He's probably one of the most, if not the most, popular interviewer on YouTube. A Nardwuar interview is more than an interview. It's an experience. When you get a Nardwuar interview, you get a different experience than any other form of press. Not only does he give each interviewer gifts and present wild bits of information about these people, but his energy feels more casual and off the cuff. One of the reasons I wanted to be a musician when I was growing up was not only because I have this deep love for music and performance, but because I always wanted to be interviewed. It could be my ego, but we're not going to talk about that. And when I started watching Nardwuar videos, I wanted to be interviewed by him. That's still one of my dreams, to be honest. I don't know if Nardwuar interviews incredibly underground music YouTubers, but maybe he does. I'm manifesting it now. Nardwuar versus Eternally Uncool. So dumb.
Doo-doo-doo-doo.
Are you a Nardwuar fan? Have you watched any of his interviews? What's your favorite? Let me know in the comments. That's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, then I highly recommend smashing the like button and sharing this video with everyone you know. We are on our way to 1,000 subscribers, and every like, every comment, every share, any interaction with this video at all really helps to push this video out and get it in front of more people who might be into what I'm doing. With all that being said, thank you for watching. As always, I'm Trevor. Stay uncool. And that's the end of the video. Goodbye.